The glued arm. The tight, flickering lights of the underground maintenance tunnel barely illuminated the grim situation unfolding. Sweat beaded on F's forehead as she moved with careful determination, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The pungent scent of burning chemicals, metal, and smoldering electrical components filled the air, mixing with the heavy weight of pain that radiated from her left arm. The agony had been building with every step she took, each moment that passed only intensifying the excruciating grip the strange substance had on her body. She could feel it, sharp, biting, relentless, the yellow adhesive compound that had once been meant for quick containment now acting as a deadly trap. Every movement was a struggle. Her metallic blue skin, streaked with sweat and grime, glistened faintly in the low light, giving off an almost eerie glow. Her arm, once free, was now completely immobilized. The compound had hardened rapidly, its form thickening and spreading as it slowly cemented her arm to her torso. She tried not to think about the painful truth that if they didn't act fast, her entire limb could be permanently fused to her body. "Nick," she grunted, barely able to get the words out through her gritted teeth. "We need to get this off me now." Commander Nick Ryder was only a few paces ahead, his large, imposing figure blocking most of the narrow tunnel's entry. His scared battle armor, evidence of countless campaigns, seemed to absorb the dim light from above, as his focused steel-gray eyes analyzed her condition. His presence was solid, unyielding, just like the man himself. But even his usual calm demeanor couldn't mask the tension now. He knew the stakes. He knew that this wasn't just a small injury. This was life and death. F's breathing grew more erratic as another wave of pain surged through her. The compound was tightening, shifting around her arm, each passing second making the situation more desperate. The metallic scent of her skin mixed with the caustic smell of the chemicals. It was unbearable. "Hold still," Nick ordered, his voice as steady as ever. "Let me see." She had worked with Nick before, during several high-risk operations, and while she respected his abilities, she had never felt this vulnerable in front of him. This was different. Her arm, locked and immobile, was more than just an injury. It was a trap. She wanted to fight it, to ignore it, but the pain left her no choice. And the worst part, she could feel the compound expanding, creeping toward her chest. If they didn't stop it soon, it could completely immobilize her body. "Nick," F managed to rasp again, this time with more urgency. "It's spreading too fast. Just cut it off, before it gets worse." For a moment, Nick didn't respond. His face softened slightly, but there was no hesitation in his movements as he knelt beside her. His scared hands worked through his belt, pulling out a selection of tools, gadgets and gear designed for situations exactly like this. But as his fingers gripped the multi-tool, his gray eyes never left her face. "No," Nick replied firmly, his tone as sharp and unwavering as ever. "I'm not cutting it off." F's golden eyes locked with his in disbelief. "Nick, I'm telling you, it's the only way. I can't move. It's getting worse. You need to." "I said no," Nick interrupted, his voice low but steady. "There's always another way, F. We just need to find it." She stared at him, confused and frustrated, as the pain escalated again. The yellow compound had now fully fused with her skin, hardening into a tough crystalline shell. She could feel the weight of it, and the movement of her arm was almost completely restricted. Yet through the throbbing pain, she couldn't help but notice the calm certainty in his voice. He wasn't giving up, and in that moment, F realized something. This wasn't just about fixing her arm. This was about Nick. There was a fierce, quiet determination in him that went beyond protocol. He didn't believe in cutting corners, even in the direst of circumstances. He worked with the multi-tool, his movements methodical, quick. His focus was entirely on her, on the problem at hand, and for the first time in a long while, F found herself holding her breath, trusting him without question. "Give me a second," Nick muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. "This compound reacts to electrical charges. If I can reverse the polarity, it should reverse the bond. It should soften it, at least enough to free you. F's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced. Was this really going to work? The thought of being stuck in this trap, of losing her arm, was almost too much to bear. She didn't want to believe it, but the reality of the situation was becoming clearer every second. If Nick couldn't free her, this could be the end of their mission. The mission that was meant to ensure survival. Her survival. The pain surged once more, and this time, F couldn't help but cry out, her voice full of frustration and helplessness. "Please, do it quickly, Nick. I can't." "I've got it," Nick said, his voice calm but urgent now. "Hold still." He made a few more adjustments with the multi-tool, fine-tuning it with precision that only a seasoned soldier like him could pull off. There was no panic in his movements, no hesitation, just the quiet confidence that came with experience. F could barely see through her blurred vision, but she could feel the vibration of the device against her trapped arm. The pain began to ebb as the device hummed against her skin. It wasn't immediate, but it was something. Slowly, inch by inch, the substance around her arm started to soften, losing its hard crystalline texture. It was working. "Nick, it's working," she whispered in disbelief, her voice breaking with relief. Nick's lips quirked into a faint smile, but his attention was still completely absorbed by his work. "Told you there was always another way," he murmured, pressing the tool along her arm. The once stubborn adhesive began to slow off in chunks, each piece coming away from her skin like a heavy burden being lifted. As the last of the hardened substance fell away, F flexed her fingers slowly, testing the range of motion. The pain had subsided, replaced by a dull ache, but she could move. She was free. Her arm was still tender, and there was a sharpness in her chest as she caught her breath, but she was alive. And it was thanks to Nick. She turned to him, her voice full of gratitude, but also disbelief. "How did you know that would work?" Her golden eyes searched his face as she spoke. "How did you know?" Nick gave a crooked grin as he finished packing away his multi-tool. "Basic chemistry," he replied casually, though there was a hint of pride in his voice. "And I've seen similar compounds before. The Arcturus Defense Corps used something like this during the Center campaign." F's mind was spinning. It was almost impossible to believe what had just happened, what he had just done for her. She was free, and she had no idea how to fully process the weight of that. "You didn't take the easy way out," she said softly, looking at him with a newfound respect. "You could have amputated. Most would have." Nick's gaze softened just a fraction, his voice taking on a quiet edge. "Most would have failed," he replied. "Humans don't give up that easily, especially not when someone else's life is on the line." Her chest tightened. His words echoed in her mind, and suddenly, she felt an odd flutter, something between awe and admiration. This wasn't just survival. This was something more, something deeper, something she hadn't expected. But there was no time to dwell on it. Their escape wasn't over yet. They still had a long way to go. Before F could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently with the impact of another explosion. Nick was instantly alert, his weapon drawn, and he didn't wait for her reply. "Save the thanks for later," Nick said sharply, already moving forward. "We've got to get out of here before they realize their trap didn't work." F nodded, already drawing her sidearm, feeling a renewed strength. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. And they would do whatever it took to make it out alive. Escaping the trap. The tunnel around them trembled as the distant explosion echoed through the facility. F's pulse quickened, and every muscle in her body tensed as adrenaline surged through her. Nick's tactical training had kicked into high gear the moment the ground had shaken beneath them. And now, there was no time to waste. They needed to move, fast. Nick gestured for F to follow him, and she immediately complied, despite her arm's lingering weakness. The sudden rush of freedom had given her a renewed sense of strength, and she could feel the bond between them solidifying with every passing second. There was no hesitation in Nick's movements. He was a seasoned soldier, battle-hardened, and he moved with an economy of motion that spoke to years of training and experience. "Keep your head down," Nick barked, his voice low and commanding. "We can't afford to be spotted." F didn't need to be told twice. They had barely made it through the maintenance corridor when another explosion rang out from deeper within the facility. The blast rattled the walls, and F could feel the heat of the blast in the confined space. The shockwave reverberated through her chest, and for a moment, she was reminded of how easily everything could be destroyed. But there was no time for that thought to take hold. She focused on staying close to Nick, her weapon ready, her senses alert. They moved quickly through the dark, their footsteps muffled by the thick metal flooring. Nick had a sharp, practiced sense of direction, knowing exactly where they needed to go. They passed a series of ventilation shafts, abandoned workstations, and power conduits, all of which had fallen silent after the initial chaos of the blast. It was like a ghost town, and the emptiness only added to the sense of urgency pressing on them. They reached a junction, and Nick raised his hand to signal a halt. His expression was tense, his sharp eyes scanning the area around them for any signs of movement. F crouched beside him, checking her own weapon and ensuring her gear was secure. Her heart pounded, not just from the physical exertion, but from the strange awareness that had begun to settle in. Every time she looked at Nick, she saw a different man, a man willing to do whatever it took to keep her alive. She couldn't remember the last time someone had done that for her. "We have 3 options," Nick whispered, glancing between the 2 passages ahead. "We can try to fight our way through, backtrack to find another route, or," he motioned toward a narrow maintenance shaft above them, barely wide enough for one person. "We can climb up and take the ventilation ducts." F looked at the shaft, skeptical. "That's a tight fit, especially with your armor." Nick shot her a knowing grin. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most comfortable one. He was already moving toward the shaft, his movements fluid and precise. "Ladies first," he said with a wink. Despite the urgency of the situation, F couldn't help but smile. It was that combination of professionalism and quiet confidence that had always intrigued her about Nick. He was serious when he needed to be, but there was always a spark of humor beneath the surface, something that made the darkest moments feel a little more bearable. She didn't hesitate, following Nick's lead. He helped boost her up, and she grasped the edge of the duct, pulling herself into the narrow space. She heard him follow behind her, the clank of his armor barely muffled by the confined space. The air inside the shaft was stale and tight, and every movement felt more restricted than the last. But it was their best chance of avoiding detection. They crawled through the ventilation duct, moving as quietly as possible. The occasional squeak of their boots against the metal was the only sound, but it was enough to make F's nerves flare. They couldn't afford to make any noise. The facility was on high alert, and the last thing they needed was to be spotted. "Keep moving," Nick whispered from behind her, his voice barely audible. "We'll have to wait out the search party before we can make our move." F didn't need to be told twice. They crawled in silence, moving through the labyrinth of ducts. Every turn seemed to lead them deeper into the belly of the facility, but F didn't dare speak. She knew they were running out of time. With every minute that passed, the search for them intensified. They reached a point in the duct where the light was faint, just enough to cast long shadows on the walls. Nick paused, signaling for silence. He reached for the small communication device clipped to his belt, his movements swift and practiced. F held her breath, straining to listen to the muffled voices and the distinct sound of heavy boots moving just below them. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the vibrations of the facility pulse through her, trying to gauge the movements of the enemy. They had to stay perfectly still. The slightest movement could give them away. Through the metal grate below, she could hear a conversation that made her stomach tighten. "They're not in the lower levels," a voice said, thick with authority. "We've tracked them this far. Search every corridor. If they've made it to the upper levels, we'll use the thermal scans. I don't care how many of our men we lose. Find them." F felt Nick's body tense behind her as the footsteps of the guards grew closer. The conversation above was barely audible, but it sent a chill through her. These weren't just security personnel. They were hunting them, with everything at their disposal. Nick's voice was a whisper in her ear, low and deliberate. "They're using thermal scans. We'll need to be extra careful. Your body temperature runs cooler than human standard, so we'll have an advantage in the ventilation ducts." F nodded, feeling a surge of relief. That was one small advantage in their favor. She knew the only way they'd make it out was by relying on each other's strengths, by using their wits to avoid detection. The sounds of footsteps faded, but F knew better than to relax. They weren't out of danger yet. As they crawled through the shaft, the air grew even staler, and the cramped space seemed to press in on them. Nick led the way, his movements precise and calculated. His focus was unwavering, even in such a confined and dangerous space. They reached a junction, and Nick stopped to listen. The faint sound of voices echoed from below. "We can't wait them out," he whispered. "If they're really developing weapons here, we can't risk waiting any longer. Those designs could be gone in minutes." F felt a pang of uncertainty. They were so close to escaping, but they also couldn't ignore the importance of what was happening in the facility. If they didn't act now, all of their efforts might have been for nothing. "We have to move," Nick said, his voice hardening. "Stay close. Let's go." They crawled on, each step taking them closer to the heart of the facility, where secrets and dangers awaited them. The tension between them, unspoken and growing, would need to be addressed, but not until they were safe. For now, the mission had to come first. Nick's hand brushed against her arm as they moved, sending an unexpected jolt of warmth through her. F wasn't sure what was happening between them, but she couldn't deny the connection she felt. It was more than just survival. It was something deeper, something that would change the course of everything, if they survived long enough to find out. In the heart of the facility, the ventilation shaft felt tighter now, as though the very walls were closing in on them. F's muscles were sore from the awkward crawl, and she could feel the burn in her joints with every movement. The air inside the shaft had become thick, stale, and suffocating, but there was no room for hesitation. Every minute they spent here brought them closer to the heart of the facility, and the unknown dangers that awaited them. Nick's presence ahead of her was a silent assurance, his movements efficient and methodical. She had worked with many soldiers before, but there was something uniquely steady about him. It wasn't just his professionalism, it was something deeper. In the middle of the chaos, his calmness acted as a counterbalance to her anxiety. Together, they moved with a sense of purpose, a shared understanding that if they failed now, everything they had fought for would be lost. They reached another junction in the duct, and Nick stopped to assess the situation. His sharp eyes flicked across the metal walls, noting every detail. The sounds of footsteps, faint but growing louder, echoed through the shafts below them. Nick held up a hand to signal a stop, and F instantly stilled, her breath caught in her throat. F's chest heightened as the footsteps grew nearer. She could feel the vibrations of their boots through the walls of the shaft. Her heart raced, every muscle tensed, waiting for the search party to pass. The air felt electric with the tension. They were so close, so vulnerable. A simple mistake now could be their last. Nick's lips barely moved as he whispered to her, "We're going to have to make a run for it. There's an access hatch up ahead. We need to get there before they realize we're in the ducts." F nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The room was getting smaller, the escape route their only hope. But she knew that even once they reached the hatch, they would face more dangers. The facility was large, and its network of tunnels was labyrinthine. There was no guarantee they would find an easy way out. "On my count," Nick murmured. His hand was steady, his grip firm on the access panel above them. "We move fast." No hesitation. F didn't reply. She simply focused on the sound of their footsteps and the rhythm of her own breathing, steady and calm. They were ready. They had to be. Now, Nick ordered. The two of them scrambled up the metal rungs of the shaft, each movement urgent as they made their way toward the access hatch. F's heart pounded in her chest as she pushed herself harder, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her every thought consumed by the necessity of escape. She could hear Nick's steady movements behind her, the sound of his boots scraping against the walls as they both worked to clear the last stretch of the tunnel. At last, they reached the hatch. Nick made quick work of it, his multi-tool humming as he disengaged the lock. The hatch creaked open with a slight resistance, revealing the dark, shadowed room beyond. The space beyond the hatch was dark and empty, save for a few scattered crates and the faint flicker of overhead emergency lights. The air felt colder here, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the ventilation shaft. F didn't hesitate. She slid out first, crouching low as she checked their surroundings. Nick followed closely behind, the sound of his movements as fluid and quiet as ever. They were inside the control room now, though it was still far from safe. F immediately moved to the small terminal at the far side of the room, her mind racing. If they were going to make it out, they needed information. They needed to find the secure comms network, and they needed to do it fast. The last thing they could afford was being stuck with no way of contacting the outside world. Nick, F whispered, glancing back toward him. We need to access the communications grid. Find out where the weapons are being developed. Nick's brow furrowed as he scanned the room. I've got your six. Do what you need to do. F nodded, grateful for his presence. As she worked to crack the security protocols on the terminal, she could feel Nick's watchful gaze on her. He was ready to act if anything went wrong. The weight of his silent support was palpable, but they didn't have much time. The terminal screen blinked to life, displaying a flurry of data and encrypted files. F's fingers flew across the keypad as she bypassed layers of security, the steady hum of the machinery around her barely audible over the pounding of her heartbeat. She could hear footsteps echoing outside the room. More guards, more search parties. They were close. Got it, F muttered under her breath, pulling up the encrypted communications log. It wasn't a full success, yet, but it was enough. She saw the coordinates and schematics for a new weapon, one that the facility had been developing in secret, one that could tip the balance of power in the war. This wasn't just about their survival anymore. This was bigger than they'd ever anticipated. This is it, F said, her voice low but urgent. Nick, we found the weapon designs. We can't let them disappear. If we don't report this, the entire sector could be compromised. Nick looked over her shoulder, his expression hardening as he reviewed the information. We need to secure this intel and get it back to HQ, he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. No matter what. Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots grew louder, and the unmistakable screech of the maintenance door opening sent a cold rush of panic through F. They weren't alone anymore. Get down, Nick hissed, pulling F behind a large crate as the door slid open with a hiss. F's heart skipped a beat. There were at least 3 soldiers outside, their armor clanking as they moved. The light from their helmets flickered across the dark room, their voices muffled but unmistakable. They've got to be in here somewhere, one of the guards said, their voice rough. The scanners didn't pick up any thermal signatures in this area, but there's no way they're just gone. Don't get complacent, another guard muttered. Search every corner. If they're still here, we'll find them. F's breath caught in her throat as they moved closer. Her eyes darted to the door. There was no way they could avoid detection. They had to act now, before they were trapped. Nick made the first move, slowly pulling a stun grenade from his belt. He silently handed it to F, who nodded in understanding. This was their only chance. The moment they were spotted, everything they had worked for would be lost. The grenade was small but deadly, capable of disabling multiple targets in a wide radius. With a silent signal, Nick counted down on his fingers. 3, 2, 1. F tossed the grenade with precise accuracy, the device landing just behind the approaching guards. There was a brief moment of confusion, followed by the sharp, high-pitched hiss of the grenade going off. The guards were knocked back, their voices turning into muffled shouts of surprise and confusion as the effects of the stun grenade overwhelmed them. The room was silent except for the faint crackling of the stun device. And Nick moved swiftly, using the chaos to their advantage. They didn't look back, didn't pause to check the guard's status. There was no time for that. They had the intel. They had to get out. Nick led the way, his hand steady as he held his weapon up, ready for any threats that might remain. Eve followed closely behind, her heart pounding in her chest, as they moved toward the next junction. They couldn't afford to stop now. The exit was close, just a few more steps. But even as they moved through the facility, the weight of what they had discovered lingered. The weapon designs weren't just about survival. They were a game changer. If they could get this intel back to their allies, it could turn the tide of the war. F couldn't help but think of everything at stake, and how, despite the danger, she was thankful she had Nick by her side.